A poor student donates blood to a dying girl. Years later, she becomes a doctor to return the favor. This was the thought that echoed in Marco's mind as he sat in the sterile waiting room, his worn sneakers tapping nervously against the linoleum floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting shadows under his already hollow cheeks. His stomach growled audibly. He hadn't eaten since yesterday's half sandwich, saving what little food he had for the strength he'd need today. "Ramirez, Marco?" The nurse called his name without looking up from her clipboard. He rose, ignoring the slight dizziness that came with standing too quickly. 21 years old, working 2 jobs while struggling through his 3rd year of college, and here he was, about to give the only thing he had left to give, his blood. Marco followed the nurse through winding corridors, each one smelling more strongly of antiseptic than the last. His threadbare jacket hung loosely on his thin frame. February in Chicago meant bone-deep cold that seeped through the cracks in his apartment windows and the worn soles of his only pair of shoes. "First-time donor?" the nurse asked, finally looking at him. Her name tag read Sandra, and her eyes softened when she took in his appearance. "Yes," Marco nodded, trying to stand a little straighter. "I heard there was a need for AB negative. That's my type." What he didn't say was that he'd also heard about the $50 gift card given to first-time donors at this particular hospital. $50 meant groceries for 2 weeks if he was careful. It meant not having to choose between textbooks and toilet paper this month. Sandra guided him to a small room where the donation would take place. "The patient you're matching with is a 17-year-old girl. Leukemia. She's had a rough go of it lately." Marco nodded again, swallowing hard. He hadn't known his blood would go to someone specific. Someone with a story, someone young, like him. He just needed the money. "Her name is Eliza Chen," Sandra continued as she prepared the equipment. "3rd round of treatments. Parents are beside themselves." As the needle slid into his arm, Marco winced, then relaxed, watching his dark red blood flow through the clear tube. He tried to imagine the girl, Eliza, lying somewhere in this same hospital, fighting for her life. Would his blood make a difference? Could something so simple as the fluid pumping through his veins help save someone he'd never met? "You're doing great," Sandra encouraged, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Not everyone makes it through the screening to donate for specific patients, you know. Your blood is special." Marco almost laughed. Nothing about him had ever been special. Not the middle child of 5 in a family barely getting by. Not the student with decent but unremarkable grades. Not the night janitor at the university library or the weekend cashier at Garcia's grocery. But here in this moment, something inside him, something he'd carried his whole life without knowing its value, was precious. When it was over, Sandra handed him the promised gift card along with a small cookie and orange juice. "You need to get your strength back. Blood sugar can drop after donating." Marco sipped the juice slowly, savoring the sweetness. "Will she be okay? Eliza?" Sandra's smile turned sad around the edges. "We hope so. She needs more than blood, but this is a start. Without donors like you, she wouldn't have a chance at all." As Marco stood to leave, steadying himself against the sudden lightheadedness, Sandra made an impulsive decision. "Wait here a moment." She returned with a small note card and pen. "Sometimes it helps patients to know there are people rooting for them. Would you like to write something for Eliza? First name only, of course." Marco stared at the blank card. What could he possibly say to a dying girl he'd never met? After a moment's hesitation, his hand moved across the paper. "Eliza, my blood is your blood now. Use it to fight. Use it to live. Marco." 3 floors above, in a private room paid for by desperate parents who'd exhausted their savings and remortgaged their home, Eliza Chen lay with her eyes closed. 17, and she'd already lost so much. Her hair, her strength, her junior year of high school, her belief that life followed predictable patterns of cause and effect. Good grades didn't prevent cancer. Being kind didn't keep cells from mutating. Loving your parents couldn't stop them from aging before your eyes as they watched you suffer. Her body felt hollow, not her own anymore. A battleground for chemicals and radiation. The latest round had left her more depleted than ever before. Her doctor had ordered an emergency transfusion when her counts dropped dangerously low that morning. "Eliza?" Her mother's voice, always trying so hard to sound cheerful. "The nurse is here with your transfusion." Eliza opened her eyes slowly, the effort monumental. The nurse, not Sandra, a different one, hung a bag of deep red liquid on the stand beside her bed. "This will help you feel stronger," the nurse explained as she connected the bag to Eliza's central line. "Someone donated this specifically for your blood type today. Someone, a faceless stranger whose cells would soon join hers. Eliza watched the blood begin its journey down the tube, imagining it carrying some essence of this unknown person into her depleted body. "There's a note, too," her mother said, holding a small card. "Would you like me to read it?" Eliza nodded, her dry lips cracking slightly with the movement. Her mother's voice caught as she read Marco's words. When she finished, she placed the card in Eliza's palm, curling her daughter's fingers around it. For the first time in weeks, something sparked in Eliza's eyes. Use it to fight. Use it to live. This stranger, Marco, had given her not just blood but a command, an expectation. Something stirred in her hollow chest. Not hope exactly, but something adjacent to it. Defiance, perhaps. As the stranger's blood flowed into her veins, warming her from the inside, Eliza made a silent promise. To Marco, to herself, she would use this gift. She would fight. And if she lived someday, somehow, she would return the favor. Kiranara, Marco never intended to return to Chicago Memorial Hospital. The $50 had helped for those 2 weeks, but life continued its relentless advance. Rent increased, textbook prices rose, and his mother's arthritis worsened, requiring medications the family could barely afford. He picked up a third job washing dishes at a campus cafe, sleeping now in fragmented 4-hour blocks between work and classes. But 3 months after his donation, an unexpected letter arrived at his apartment. Plain envelope, hospital logo in the corner. Inside, a formal thank you note for his donation, standard procedure. But paper clipped to it was something else. A handwritten note on pale blue stationery. Dear Marco, I don't know if the hospital will even forward this, but I had to try. I'm the girl who received your blood in February. I wanted you to know it worked. I'm fighting. I'm living. Your words stayed with me through some very dark nights. My doctors say I'm responding well to the new treatment protocol. Maybe it's the medicine. Maybe it's having AB negative blood from someone who writes like a warrior. Thank you isn't enough, but it's all I have right now. Eliza Chen. P.S. If you're ever back at Chicago Memorial, room 418, I have a deck of cards and hours to kill. Marco read the letter 5 times, standing in the narrow hallway of his building, oblivious to the draft seeping under the door. He'd never been anyone's warrior before. For days, he carried Eliza's note in his pocket, taking it out during breaks between classes or in the quiet moments before dawn when he mopped the library floors. The paper grew soft at the creases from constant handling. When his next paycheck came, Marco did something he couldn't logically justify. He bought a small potted succulent, a resilient little plant with a bright pink bloom, and took 3 buses across town to Chicago Memorial. The halls seemed less intimidating this time, though his heart raced as the elevator climbed to the 4th floor. Room 418 had a closed door with a cheerful sign, "Visitors, please check with nursing station before entering." The nurse at the station eyed him suspiciously until he explained himself, showing Eliza's note as proof of invitation. "She's having a good day," the nurse said after calling into the room. 10 minutes only. She tires easily. The Eliza who greeted him from the hospital bed was not what he'd imagined. Despite her illness, she radiated a fierce kind of energy. Her head was wrapped in a colorful scarf, her face thin but animated, her eyes sharp and intelligent. Various medical machines surrounded her, but she seemed to command the space rather than be diminished by it. "Marco the warrior," she said, a smile transforming her face. "You actually came." He stood awkwardly by the door, suddenly aware of his shabby clothes and the small plant clutched in his hands. I brought you this. It's hard to kill. Trust me, I've tried with others." Eliza laughed, the sound surprising both of them with its strength. "Perfect. My track record with staying alive has improved recently, but I'm still new at it." She gestured to the chair beside her bed. "Sit. Tell me about the person whose blood I'm borrowing." And somehow, against all social logic, Marco did. He told her about juggling 3 jobs and full-time classes, about his parents who had immigrated from Guatemala before he was born, working impossible hours to give their 5 children opportunities they never had, about his dream of becoming an engineer, of building things that would last, about donating blood for the gift card, and the unexpected way it had made him feel worthy for the first time. In return, Eliza told him about life before leukemia, competitive swimming, her passion for biology, her plan to become a doctor, someday, if someday happens for me. She spoke matter-of-factly about her illness, the treatments, the statistical probabilities her doctors discussed when they thought she couldn't hear. "It's strange," she said, turning the small succulent in her hands, "how clear everything becomes when it might be taken away. Before I got sick, I was obsessed with college applications, SAT scores, whether Jason Tamaki would ask me to prom. She looked up at Marco, her eyes suddenly older than her years. Now I just want to see another summer. Feel sun on my face without worrying about infections or radiation burns. The nurse appeared at the door before Marco could respond. Time's up. Eliza needs to rest before her afternoon treatment. Marco stood, suddenly reluctant to leave. I could come back. If you want company, I mean. I know hospitals are boring as hell. Eliza supplied with another surprising laugh. Yes, come back. Bring those cards I mentioned. Her expression softened. And Marco? Thank you. Not just for the blood. As he turned to leave, Eliza called after him. Wait, take this. She reached for something on her bedside table, wincing slightly at the movement, and held out a book. I've read it 3 times this month. Your turn. The book was worn, its pages dog-eared and spine cracked from multiple readings. The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. My Spanish isn't great, she admitted, but there's an English translation in there too. The story, it's about endurance, survival, people finding each other across impossible circumstances. Their fingers brushed as Marco took the book, and he was struck by how warm her hand felt. This girl fighting for her life had more warmth to share than he'd felt in months of just surviving. That night, after his shift at the cafe, Marco opened Eliza's book instead of his engineering textbook. He read until sunrise painted his small apartment in gold. Her notes in the margins, like a separate conversation unfolding alongside the story. Spring blossomed into summer, and Marco's visits to room 418 became a weekly ritual. He donated blood twice more, specifically for Eliza, ignoring the lightheadedness that lasted longer each time due to his own poor nutrition. He brought playing cards as promised and discovered Eliza was ruthlessly competitive at gin rummy. Sometimes he read to her when the treatments left her too exhausted to hold a book. Sometimes they simply sat in companionable silence while she slept and he studied. On his 8th visit, the room was empty. His heart stopped, breath catching painfully in his chest as he stared at the stripped bed. The succulent remained on the windowsill, but Eliza's books, photos, and the colorful scarves that usually draped the bedside chair were gone. The nurse who had warmed to his regular visits found him frozen in the doorway. She's been moved to the ICU, she explained quickly, seeing his expression. Infection. It happens sometimes after this kind of treatment. Her immune system is basically non-existent right now. Can I? Marco began, but the nurse was already shaking her head. Family only in the ICU. I'm sorry. For 3 weeks, Marco continued to appear at the hospital after his evening shifts, bringing fresh, succulent cuttings to add to the original plant, which he watered faithfully. The nursing staff updated him when they could. Eliza was fighting, they said. Critical but stable, then improving. Then finally, miraculously, returning to room 418. She looked different when he finally saw her again. Thinner, somehow smaller in the hospital bed, with a new fragility to her movements. But her eyes lit up when he appeared in the doorway, and the smile that spread across her face made something twist painfully in his chest. You're still here, she said, her voice raspy from the intubation she'd required. Marco crossed the room in 3 strides, surprising himself by taking her hand. It felt bird-like in his own. Where else would I be? She squeezed his fingers weakly. They wouldn't let you visit in the ICU. I asked. He noticed then the collection of succulent cuttings had grown into a small garden on her windowsill. You kept them alive. We had a deal, right? Eliza's attempted laugh dissolved into a cough. You gave me blood to live. I keep your plants alive in return. As summer faded into fall, Eliza grew stronger. The treatments were working. Her cancer was in remission, her doctors cautiously optimistic. Marco brought her missed schoolwork, helping her study for the GED exam she was determined to pass before the year's end. They celebrated her 18th birthday in room 418 with a contraband cupcake Marco smuggled past the nursing station. Eliza's parents joined them, treating Marco with a warmth and gratitude that made him uncomfortable. He wasn't used to being seen as someone special, someone who mattered in another family story. You know I'm getting out of here next week, Eliza told him as they shared the cupcake. For good, they think. Outpatient treatment from now on. Marco stared at the crumbs on his plate. He should feel nothing but joy at this news, but something else twisted beneath his ribs. Something that felt dangerously like loss. That's amazing, Eliza. Really? She watched him carefully. I'll still be in Chicago. Still need blood tests and checkups. Marco nodded, not trusting himself to speak. And I still owe you, she continued. You saved my life. He looked up then, startled. I didn't. You did, she interrupted firmly. Not just the blood. You gave me something to fight for when fighting felt impossible. She reached across the small table between them, her fingers brushing his wrist where the tiny mark from his needle remained. I'm going to medical school, Marco. I decided, however long it takes, whatever I have to do to catch up. I'm going to become a doctor who helps people like you. People like me? He echoed, confused. People who give everything they have, even when they have nothing to spare. Her eyes were fierce, determined. I saw how dizzy you were after those donations. I know you weren't eating enough, that you were working 3 jobs. But you kept coming back, kept giving. Marco felt his cheeks burn. I didn't do it to be paid back. I know. Eliza smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. That's why I have to. The day Eliza left the hospital, Marco couldn't be there. His mother had fallen at work, and he'd taken an extra shift at the grocery store to help cover the medical bills. But when he returned to his apartment that night, exhausted and heartsick, a package waited outside his door. Inside was a new succulent, larger and healthier than any of the cuttings he'd brought Eliza, planted in a ceramic pot painted with tiny red blood cells. The note tucked beside it read, Marco, this one's called Survivor's Blood. Seemed appropriate. I'm going home today, but this isn't goodbye. You're stuck with me now. Our blood types are bonded for life. Come by my house when you can. My mom makes tamales that will change your life. Eliza, P.S. I got a perfect score on my GED practice test. Turns out near-death experiences are motivating. Years pass like pages turning in a well-loved book. Marco graduated with his engineering degree, the ceremony attended by his family and, to his continued amazement, Eliza and her parents. He found work at a firm specializing in sustainable urban housing, his starting salary more money than his family had seen in a year. Eliza, true to her word, pursued her medical education with relentless determination. Her recovery had setbacks, hospitalizations for infections, months of exhaustion that forced her to take semesters off. But she attacked her studies with the same fierce energy she'd shown fighting cancer. They stayed in touch through it all, their friendship evolving into something neither could quite name, but both fiercely protected. 8 years after their first meeting, Marco's life had transformed. At 29, he had his own apartment in a decent neighborhood, a career he was proud of, and enough stability to help his parents retire from the cleaning jobs that had broken their bodies over decades. The constant anxiety about money had eased, though never quite disappeared. Some wounds heal but leave permanent marks. It was a Tuesday evening in April when his phone rang, Eliza's name lighting up the screen. Her calls were less frequent now as she navigated her final year of medical school, her residency applications consuming her limited free time. Guess who just matched for their residency? Her voice bubbled with excitement before he could even say hello. Dr. Duran Chen, I presume. Marco grinned, setting down the blueprints he'd been reviewing. Not officially for another 2 months, but yes. She paused and he could picture her bouncing slightly on her toes, the way she did when containing excitement. And guess where? Harvard? Mayo Clinic? That fancy hospital in Switzerland you were talking about? Chicago Memorial. Her voice softened. I'm coming home, Marco. Something warm spread through his chest. That's great, Eliza. They're lucky to have you. There's more, she continued. I got into their hematology-oncology program. I'll be specializing in blood cancers and treatment. Like what I had. Marco leaned back in his chair, a strange pride filling him. Of course you are. Full circle. Not quite full circle yet, Eliza said, her tone changing slightly. That's actually why I'm calling. I need a favor. 3 days later, Marco once again found himself walking the corridors of Chicago Memorial Hospital, this time accompanying Eliza. No longer a patient, she moved through the halls with purpose, her white coat crisp over professional attire, her once bald head now crowned with a sleek bob that swung when she walked. Only the slightest hint of caution in her movements betrayed the years of illness her body had endured. Are you going to tell me what we're doing here? Marco asked as they rode the elevator to the 6th floor, a part of the hospital he'd never visited. Patients. Eliza smiled, leading him down another corridor to a set of double doors marked Hematology Research. Inside, the laboratory buzzed with quiet activity. White-coated researchers bent over microscopes or computer screens, the air humming with expensive equipment. Eliza nodded to several people as she guided Marco to a small office at the back. Dr. Wanimirtum, Inuwasabuanonin. Harriet Sandoval, the name on the door read, Head of Hematology Research. The woman who greeted them was in her 60s, with silver hair and bright, intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. Eliza, and this must be Marco. She extended her hand with a warm smile. I've heard so much about you. Marco shook her hand, confusion evident on his face. Doctor, Anone de Senisharanans. Sandoval was my oncologist, Eliza explained. She saved my life, and now she's going to be my research mentor during residency. The older doctor gestured for them to sit. Eliza tells me you were her blood donor during her treatment. One of them, I guess. Marco nodded, still puzzled. Doctor, Sandoval and Eliza exchanged a look. Not just one of them, the doctor corrected. Quite special, actually. Your blood has some unusual properties that prove particularly effective in Eliza's case. What kind of properties? Marco asked, suddenly uneasy. Doctor, Sandoval leaned forward. Your blood contains an unusually high concentration of natural killer cells, a type of lymphocyte that helps fight cancer and viral infections. In most donors, these cells are present, but not notably abundant. In your case, they're off the charts. And when I received your blood, Eliza continued, my body's response to treatment dramatically improved. Doctor, Sandoval has been tracking this phenomenon ever since. We believe there's potential for a new type of immunotherapy based on this discovery. The older doctor explained, a treatment that could help patients like Eliza, patients whose cancers don't respond to standard protocols. Marco looked between them. I don't understand. What does this have to do with me now? Eliza took a deep breath. We want to study your blood, Marco, more extensively than before. It could help develop treatments for patients who have no other options. The commitment would be significant. Dr. Gunwasan Sandoval added, regular donations, tissue samples, possibly even bone marrow if the research proceeds as we hope. Marco sat back, overwhelmed. You're saying my blood, just my regular blood, could help save people? Not just any blood. Eliza's eyes shone with emotion. Your blood. The same blood you gave when you had nothing else to give. The blood that saved me. Marco looked down at his hands, remembering how they had trembled with hunger and exhaustion the day he'd first donated. How could something born from such desperation become so valuable? There would be compensation, of course. Dr. Sandoval said, the research grant includes... I don't care about that. Marco interrupted, looking up at Eliza. You really think this could help people like you? Kids fighting cancer? I do. Eliza nodded, her expression solemn. It's why I chose this specialty, this research. To return the favor, not just to you, but to anyone who needs what we might discover. Marco didn't hesitate. Then I'm in. For the next 2 years, Marco's life intertwined with Eliza's research in ways he never could have imagined. Regular blood donations became part of his routine, followed by more invasive procedures as the study progressed. The researchers isolated components of his immune system, studying how they functioned against cancer cells in laboratory settings. Eliza, now doctor, Chen, threw herself into the research with the same determination she'd shown fighting her own illness. She worked punishing hours, splitting time between patient care during her residency and laboratory work with Dr. Sandoval. Marco often found her asleep at her desk when he arrived for his appointments, case files or research papers still clutched in her hands. You need to rest too, you know? He told her after finding her this way for the 3rd time in a month. You can't help your patients if you collapse. Eliza rubbed her eyes, smiling tiredly. Says the man who worked 3 jobs while donating blood. Exactly. Learn from my mistakes. He placed a coffee on her desk, made exactly how she liked it, with cinnamon and too much sugar. I didn't fight through engineering school just to have you work yourself to death before you cure cancer. Their roles had reversed in subtle ways. Now he was the one bringing her food, reminding her to sleep, supporting her through grueling days when patients were lost despite her best efforts. The research progressed slowly, with promising results in laboratory settings, but countless regulatory hurdles before human trials could begin. Then 18 months into the study, everything changed. Marco arrived for his regular appointment to find the laboratory in an unusual state of activity. Researchers huddled around computer screens, voices excited rather than methodically calm. Eliza was nowhere to be seen. Dr. Sandoval emerged from her office, her normally composed face alight with excitement. Ah, Marco. Perfect timing. We've had a breakthrough. She led him to a computer displaying complex graphs and microscope images. See these cells? They're from a patient with treatment-resistant leukemia, similar to Eliza's case but much more aggressive. We introduced the modified immune cells derived from your samples, and look, She pointed to a time-lapse video showing cancer cells being systematically destroyed. Complete clearance within 48 hours. Marco stared at the screen, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. Does this mean... It means we're ready to apply for clinical trials. Doctor, Sandoval confirmed. We've reproduced the results across multiple samples. The therapy appears targeted and highly effective, with minimal damage to healthy cells. Where's Eliza? Marco asked, still processing the news. She should be here for this. Doctor, Sandoval's expression shifted slightly. Emergency at the hospital. One of her patients, a 7-year-old boy with recurrent leukemia, failed bone marrow transplant. His condition deteriorated overnight. Marco felt a chill. Will he? Conventional medicine has done all it can for him, the doctor said quietly. Eliza is with the family now. Marco found her hours later in the hospital chapel. Not praying, just sitting in silence. Her white coat rumpled, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and tears. Dr. Hormishiniwan Sudarajhorn, Sandoval told me about the breakthrough, he said softly, sliding into the pew beside her. And about your patient. Eliza didn't look up. His name is Miguel. He loves dinosaurs and wants to be a paleontologist. Perfect bone marrow match, textbook procedure, and his body is rejecting it anyway. He's 7 years old, Marco. 7. Her voice broke. The experimental treatment is months away from approval, maybe years. He doesn't have months. Marco sat with her in silence, their shoulders touching. A strange weight settled in his chest, the familiar weight of knowing exactly what needed to be done. Consequences be damned. What if it wasn't years away? He finally asked. For Miguel, I mean. Eliza turned to him, confusion clouding her tear-stained face. What are you talking about? Compassionate use. I've been reading about it. When conventional treatments fail, patients can sometimes access experimental therapies. It's not that simple. Eliza shook her head. The therapy derived from your cells is still being refined. The paperwork alone would take weeks, and Miguel doesn't have. Then we don't wait for paperwork. Marco interrupted, his voice low but firm. I'm right here, Eliza. My blood, my cells. If they can help Miguel, use them. Directly. She stared at him, understanding dawning. That's completely against protocol. Unproven. Potentially dangerous. I could lose my medical license even suggesting it. But would it work? Marco pressed. Based on everything you've seen in the lab? Eliza closed her eyes. Sure, theoretically. Yes, the mechanism is similar to what saved me. Just more targeted, more potent. Then do it. Marco took her hand, his grip firm and steady. Say I came in to donate blood for a family friend. Routine compassion, nothing unusual. The records show I'm a universal donor. You're not, though. You're a B negative, remember? Hardly universal. Check again. Marco's eyes bore into hers. Pretty sure my chart says O negative now. Eliza's breath caught. Marco, you're talking about falsifying medical records. Conducting an unauthorized experimental treatment? That's not bending the rules, that's breaking them entirely. No. Marco shook his head. I'm talking about saving a 7-year-old boy who loves dinosaurs. Everything else is just paperwork. For a long moment, Eliza was silent, the weight of her medical oath and professional ethics visibly warring with the desperate need to save her patient. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Even if I agreed to this insanity, and I'm not saying I do, the treatment protocol requires specialized processing of your cells, equipment, lab access. It's not as simple as a direct transfusion. So we get creative, Marco replied. You have access to the lab. Doctor, Sandoval trusts you. One night, that's all we need. You're asking me to risk everything I've worked for, Eliza said, but there was a shift in her tone, the faintest hint of possibility. Marco leaned closer. You once told me you became a doctor to return the favor. Not just to me, but to anyone who needed what you could give. Miguel needs it now. That night, in the quiet hours when the research lab was empty save for automated equipment, Dr. Eliza Chen broke every oath she had taken as a physician and kept the one that mattered most to her heart. With Marco's willing participation and her own trembling hands, she processed his blood according to the experimental protocol, preparing the specialized cellular therapy that had shown such promise in the laboratory. By morning, 7-year-old Miguel received what his chart described as supportive care plasma transfusion from a compassionate donor. Only 3 people in the hospital knew the truth of what flowed into his veins. 3 days later, Miguel's blood counts began to improve. A week after that, bone marrow analysis showed the first signs of cancer regression. By the end of the month, his doctors were using words like unprecedented and miraculous to describe his recovery. Dr. Anarindo Wanabrinwaran de Nestorinant Sandoval, reviewing Miguel's case with growing suspicion, called Eliza to her office. An interesting coincidence, the older doctor said, sliding Miguel's file across the desk. This recovery pattern looks remarkably similar to our laboratory results. Eliza met her mentor's gaze steadily, saying nothing. If I were to compare the timing of this miraculous recovery with, say, certain access logs to our research lab, Dr. Sandoval continued, her expression unreadable. You would be wasting valuable research time on administrative matters. Eliza replied quietly. Doctor, Sandoval studied her protege for a long moment. The official clinical trial application was approved this morning. We can begin recruiting patients next month. She closed Miguel's file. Fortunately for everyone involved, I've been too busy with paperwork to investigate anomalous lab access or review security footage that might have been accidentally corrupted during a system update. She removed her glasses, suddenly looking every one of her 65 years. I was where you are once, Eliza. A dying child, conventional medicine failing, an experimental treatment that wasn't quite ready. Her voice softened. I chose to follow protocol. The child died while we waited for approvals. I've lived with that decision for 30 years. Rising from her desk, Dr. Sandoval walked to the door. Miguel's case will make an excellent addition to our preliminary data. Anonymous case study, of course. The remarkable power of the human immune system and all that. As she opened the door, she added quietly, tell Marco his next official donation is scheduled for Thursday. We'll need to run a complete panel, entirely routine for our primary study subject. The clinical trial progressed with remarkable success rates. 1 year became 2, then 3. The therapy derived from Marco's unique immune system, now refined and reproducible without requiring his continued donations, moved through the regulatory process with unprecedented speed, championed by Dr. Sandoval and the growing list of miraculous recoveries documented in the trial. Marco's role evolved from donor to partner in the research, his engineering background proving unexpectedly valuable in designing delivery systems for the cellular therapy. He and Eliza worked side by side, their personal and professional lives increasingly intertwined, their shared secret about Miguel forging a bond that transcended ordinary relationships. On a crisp autumn day, 5 years after their illicit late-night laboratory session, Marco and Eliza stood together on a stage at Chicago Memorial Hospital. Behind them, a banner announced the official FDA approval of Ramirez-Chen immunotherapy for treatment-resistant hematological malignancies. Dr. Sandoval, now retired but beaming with pride, introduced them to the assembled crowd of medical professionals, researchers, and former patients, including a 12-year-old Miguel, taller now and healthy, clutching a model dinosaur and flanked by his grateful parents. This revolutionary therapy began with a simple act of kindness. Doctor, Sandoval told the audience, a college student donating blood to a dying girl. That girl becoming a doctor determined to return the favor. Together, creating a treatment that has already saved hundreds of lives and will save thousands more. As applause filled the auditorium, Eliza squeezed Marco's hand beneath the podium, out of sight of the cameras. Full circle, she whispered. Later that evening, away from the speeches and celebrations, they stood on the roof of the hospital, looking out over the Chicago skyline glittering in the darkness. The same city where, years earlier, a desperately poor student had given blood for a gift card, and a dying girl had fought to live long enough to make a difference. I never told you why I really came to donate that day, Marco said, his breath visible in the cold air. It wasn't altruism. I needed the money for groceries. Eliza leaned against his shoulder. I know. You told me eventually. Not everything, though. He turned to face her. What I never told you was that I'd been turned away from 2 blood banks before Chicago Memorial. Anemia from not eating properly. I lied about when I'd last eaten so they'd take my blood here. I was that desperate. Yet here we are. Eliza marveled, gesturing toward the hospital around them. Your desperation became my salvation. My salvation became Miguel's miracle. Miguel's miracle became hundreds more. Marco looked down at their intertwined hands, the hands of the janitor's son and the cancer survivor, now responsible for a medical breakthrough that would outlive them both. You know what this means, right? He asked softly. That we've developed a revolutionary cancer treatment and changed modern medicine forever? Eliza smiled. No, Marco shook his head, pulling her closer as snowflakes began to fall around them. It means you finally returned the favor. We're even now. Eliza laughed, the sound rising into the night sky, as free and joyful as the girl who had once believed she wouldn't live to see another summer. Not even close, Marco Ramirez. Not even close. In the hospital room below them, another patient received the first commercial dose of Ramirez-Chen immunotherapy. A 10-year-old girl with eyes full of fear and a body too tired to fight anymore. As the medicine entered her veins, her mother read her the story printed on the treatment brochure about a poor student who once donated blood to a dying girl and how years later she became a doctor to return the favor. And though science would document the cellular changes that would save the child's life, it could never fully explain the most powerful component of her healing: the quiet certainty that somewhere in this same hospital, two ordinary people who had once been as scared and hopeless as she was now stood together beneath the falling snow, living proof that even the smallest acts of kindness could echo through lifetimes, connecting strangers through the simplest and most profound gift of all: the chance to live, to heal, and to return the favor.